We're going to pause briefly from looking at areas and we're going to do some revision of metric units of length. You all know that there are 4 metric units of length, which are millimeters, centimeters, meters and kilometers. So we can write their units down for short, which would be millimeters. So that's clearly the smallest metric unit. Then after millimeters we have centimeters, cm. After centimeters we have meters. And then finally we have kilometers. So those are the metric units that we're familiar with in order. Smallest is millimeters, then centimeters, then meters, and the largest is kilometers. Now, we have to remind ourselves how to change between these metric units. So we're going to remind ourselves how to change between millimeters and centimeters, between centimeters and meters, and between meters and kilometers. So let's look first of all at millimeters and centimeters. How do we change between them? First thing we do is write down the smaller unit first, millimeters, and then write down the bigger unit after, centimeters. Always put 1 under the bigger unit. So we're going to put 1 under centimeters. You all know that there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. So we write 10 under millimeters. Now, let's say we wanted to change from centimeters into millimeters. So we're moving in this direction. What you ask yourself is, how do we get from 1 to 10? So to get from 1 to 10, we have to multiply 1 by 10. So to change from centimeters into millimeters, we have to multiply by 10. Now, the reverse is true. What about we want to change from millimeters into centimeters? So we want to move in this direction. Well, how do we get from 10 to 1? Well, we've got to divide by 10 this time. Do you notice when you change from the bigger unit into the smaller unit, you multiply? And when you change from the smaller unit into the bigger unit, you actually divide. Okay, how do we convert between centimeters and meters? Again, put the 2 units down, put the smaller unit down first and the bigger one immediately after. Always put 1 under the bigger unit. And ask yourself, how many centimeters are in 1 meter? There's clearly 100. So again, let's say we wanted to change from meters into centimeters. So we'd be moving in that direction. So how do you get from 1 to 100? What do you got to do to 1? You have to multiply it by 100. So to change meters into centimeters, we multiply by 100. Let's say we wanted to change centimeters into meters. So this time we would be asking ourselves, how do you get from 100 to 1? What do you got to do to 100 to turn it into 1? Well, you're going to divide it by 100. Again, notice that when we change a bigger unit into a smaller unit, we multiply. When we change a smaller unit into a bigger unit, we divide. Okay, the last conversion we need to remind ourselves of. How do we change between meters and kilometers? Well, first of all, write the 2 units down. Put the smaller unit down first and then the bigger unit immediately after. Always put 1 under the bigger unit. And ask yourself, how many meters are in a kilometer? There's 1,000. So, first thing we're going to ask ourselves is, how do we change from kilometers into meters? So how do we get from 1 to 1,000? Well, we'll have to multiply by 1,000. And likewise, how do we get from 1,000 to 1? How do we turn 1,000 into 1? Well, we've got to divide by 1,000. Again, notice that when you're changing the bigger unit into the smaller unit, you multiply. When you're turning the smaller unit into the bigger unit, you're dividing.